So what are some of the political trends that could affect farmers? Specifically, we talked about the cap and trade legislation that's before Congress right now. So could you expand a little bit about that?
Well, I think there's reasonable concern out there by agriculture because we are carbon dependent. I mean, we use diesel fuel, we use nitrogen fertilizer. We are big burners of carbon, and we create food. And at the present time, last year we were in a definite upswing with all of our pricing, and frankly now we're looking at some price pressure, particularly in the grains, where we now have an expected large corn crop. We had a decent-sized wheat crop worldwide this year, and so we're seeing some pressure on those prices. And they're talking about entertaining a concept of taxing us on carbon. Now, we initially thought that cap and trade was going to be to our benefit in agriculture. If we sequestered carbon, we didn't tear up the dirt, and we no-tilled, they'd give us money. And it looks like that's kind of gone away, or is certainly less attractive. Maybe somebody's going to make some money out, but right now those carbon credits are negligible. So before we go off, or before our U.S. policy goes off in a big way, let's look around and see who our competitors are, and are they shackled the same way? And they're not. And so in the real world, it's really hard to put a shackle on an industry and expect it to remain competitive worldwide. And we've got a huge mission in agriculture. We have to build production on our current arable land because there's not a lot more out there. And we do that by utilizing carbon fuels currently, carbon-based fertilizers. That's how we feed people. And I think feeding people is as important as anything else that we're doing in the world.
So now, what would be an acceptable cap and trade policy for farmers and ranchers that would benefit them?
Well, I think it has to be accepted worldwide. Okay. I don't think we can have cap and trade in the U.S. only. And from what I've seen, and I'm no politician or farm policy expert, there's a lot more people talented and smarter than I am. I can guarantee you that. I was in the half of the class that made the top half possible. But I'll tell you this much, I know about my costs in my farm, and you do anything to add to those costs, you take away the incentive for me to do it. Okay. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind. Without the world signing on to this, and I think it's kind of based maybe on some questionable science. Mm-hmm. Now people tell me, you know what, Mark, that's immaterial. You know, the policymakers believe that we've got global warming or climate change or whatever they want to call it, and that's the way it is. Mm-hmm. And I disagree with that. I want to see the real hard numbers, long study with empirical evidence saying, yes, the world is getting warmer, and all those science fiction movies are going to be true. And, we'll be underwater in New York and all that. And I don't know that they are. Okay. So I think, and I've asked politicians, I've interviewed senators and congressmen, and I live in Iowa where, every 4 years we get every presidential candidate, in our state. We don't have a lot of people up there. Well, one morning I met Senator Obama and Senator Clinton and Senator McCain and Governor Huckabee, and I was just trying to get into my shower.
Today you gave some societal trends and some indices to watch for our farmers and ranchers to know when the economy is rebounding. Could you list a couple of those?
There was a big recession, mm-hmm. And I know we're talking about government health care potentially and all these kinds of things, but you got to remember the government predicted that we were in this recession 12 months after we were in it. So that's kind of the expertise coming from there for other areas. If you look at what happens in our consumption world of agriculture, a critical component is people eating out. When the economy is strong, companies send people on the road to make person-to-person calls. Families go out to big dinners. Money is spent in restaurants. Restaurants are a great indicator in my mind of what's happening, and they're one of the largest employers in the United States as well. So the National Restaurant Association has an index that they use, and it's been heading south for a long time. Just started turning up in the first part of June and has continued to strengthen. And I think that's a plus because people eat beef and pork. Most importantly right now, they consume dairy products and cheese. There's nothing better than pizza. And when that's not happening, when people aren't in restaurants, they aren't consuming as much of those products. So that index is an important one for those of us, particularly on the protein production side, on the meat and dairy side and poultry side of agriculture to keep track of. And like I say, now that's starting to track up, which is good. And the general economy seems to be tracking up, also a good thing.
What are three world issues that are affecting our farmers and ranchers here in the United States?
Obviously, financing is a big one. I mean, we've had this capital markets meltdown. That's impacted a lot of expansion overseas. The growth rates in China and India have slowed. So the outside equity and capital markets are certainly a factor in what's happening in the U.S. Obviously, environmental policy here in the United States is continuing to put pressure on the livestock sector to continue to produce here. And at some point, if you're a livestock producer, you say, you want to produce livestock, or do you need to go somewhere else and do it? And so I think that's another long-term factor. And I think the third biggest factor, obviously, is global trade. Currency valuations and those issues that are extremely important. I think it's extremely important that America continues to maintain its superpower status in the world, guaranteeing free trade. Trade flows freely from country to country. I think that's extremely important.
Today you discussed ethanol and its importance in our defense of the United States. Could you expand a little bit about that? Well,
I'm an old Navy officer, not a very good one, but I served. And the thing that's driven home to the Navy is that our primary mission is to, it's really two parts. First of all, our mission is to project the power of the United States worldwide, and we have the only blue water Navy in the world. Everyone else has what we call a brown water or a coastal Navy. That's changing. China is building a pretty substantial submarine fleet, so it's changing. But currently the United States, even in the power years of the Soviet Union, we had a much larger fleet. Now our fleet has shrunk. We've gone from 600 ships to 300 ships. A lot of that made sense as our tactics changed. We're using a lot more drones than pilots. We're changing our military quite a bit. But the second mission of the Navy and the Marine Corps, the Fleet Marines, is to keep the sea lanes of communication open and keeping trade moving. So that's extremely important. And the way we stay strong in the United States is we produce our own food. We can get along with virtually no food imports in the United States. Other countries don't have that option. They have to bring in food, whether it's beef, pork, dairy, grains. They have to bring those products in. That is one of our strengths. That's one of our great defensive strengths, is a food supply. Same thing is true with crude oil. Crude oil, 40% of our imported crude oil has to transit the Straits of Hormuz. They have to stay open for us to have gas to put in our cars. And so, yeah, that's an important part of our defense, is to be able to produce more fuel domestically. And we have decided, for whatever reason, we're not going to punch a hole in Anwar. We're not going to punch a hole outside the Gulf of Mexico. We're not going to get some of our coastal, somewhat low-hanging fruit when it comes to crude oil. We said we're not going to do that. So we're going to continue to import oil. If we can produce 15 billion gallons of ethanol, which we're slated to do in 5 years, and then after that cellulosic ethanol, then you're going to see that tide shift, and we're going to have less dependence on the Straits of Hormuz, on places like Venezuela for crude oil. So that's where it kind of becomes a security issue for the United States.
Now, what, in your opinion, would be the key to long-term success for our farmers and ranchers here in the United States?
And Mark Gold said it very well, that about every decade we get 1 or 2 years of good profitability in grain production in the United States. And we've been in a bull market in corn, for instance, and wheat since about the middle of September 2006. So this bull market has gotten fairly long in the tooth. We're going to see prices probably under some pressure going forward. And where our profitability historically has come from, when it comes to grain production in the United States, has been from innovation, from efficiencies developed by producers on the farm, adapting to new technology and adapting that technology quickly. And we've seen it with products such as Roundup Ready soybeans and corn. We've seen it with controlling disease in wheat. We've seen those things come in that helped improve our productivity, better seed selection and so forth. So that's where we really get our returns from most of the time in agriculture. Not very often are they going to come directly from the market like we've seen the last 2.5 years.